Welcome, everybody, to the Apex Sunday podcast. We're hosted by two petrol heads, myself, John Dowsett, and Rob Ross. And this is the podcast that banters and rambles on about Formula One races, news, and events.
Thanks, John, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast for the 2021 Bahrain Grand Prix. Before we get to the race, John, there's some news to discuss, and I think we can start with some team building news. What do you think of Williams hiring François-Xavier Demisson from Volkswagen?
I think it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, all it tells me, it screams that with no sponsorship on the Williams car, that we're going to see Porsche or Audi or Volkswagen in Formula One in a few years. It looks like they're building a farm team. They're building a skunk works, I should say, where they're going to set everything up, and once everything gets sort of put together, we're going to see a new name, especially with Mercedes pulling out, I think.
Yeah, and do you think it would be Porsche or Audi or Volkswagen?
Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they all have rich racing heritage. Volkswagen is mostly in touring car and off-road stuff like Dakar. Audi was in Formula One in the form of Auto Union, and they dominated the top level of sports cars, killed everybody. And, well, need I say anything about Porsche?
Right, yeah. They hired Josh Capito from Volkswagen earlier, so there definitely looks like a tie-up there. And the second thing in team building news, I would say, was Alpine signing Davide Brivio from the Suzuki MotoGP team as the racing team manager. What are your thoughts on that hire?
I've not really followed MotoGP that much, so I can't really comment. The only thing I can comment is that I don't know how much translates from MotoGP to Formula One racing.
Right. Yeah, he was the guy who brought Rossi from Repsol Honda to Yamaha. Nowadays, Rossi and Yamaha are synonymous, and basically that partnership brought a lot of success to MotoGP. It increased in popularity, but Rossi went to Ducati for a while, and at that time, Davide followed him as an advisor, but then Suzuki came to him and hired him as their team manager as they went back into MotoGP. They got back in 2015, and by 2020, 6 years, they had already won the Riders' Championship with Joan Mir and the Teams' Championship. In regard to relevance to Formula One, both of these are both global championships. So he's very familiar with, paddocks and, international laws and all the things that happen as you travel around the world racing.
Well, maybe then this is a really interesting effort on their part. If he's got that sort of success, it just breeds success. They need more money.
Yes.
So
he was very well regarded by everyone in MotoGP, so hopefully it translates to Alpine. And, we both discussed Renault basically not living up to their old standards. When I got into F1, you had to have the Renault engine or you weren't going to win a championship. And now it's Mercedes, obviously, and possibly this year, Honda. So they do need to make some changes and to improve for sure.
Who knows? We could see Renault next year with the new ground rules, effects and the changes for 2022 being top of the charts. I mean, we see that. We've seen Ferrari, we've seen Renault, we've seen Mercedes, we've seen McLaren, we've seen Red Bull. There's a dominant team. Who's it going to be? And next year, I think we have a valid chance to see anybody at the top.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'd be nice to see Alonso at the front again, right? Everyone's excited about the possibility of a Lewis versus Verstappen battle, but throw Alonso in that, possibly, Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc, and we could have some very, very good racing.
Lando Norris
too, yeah. And of course, Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good quality racing drivers. And I'm not saying there's bad quality teams, but there's definitely, top teams are very far in front, and then the midfield.
Do you think that the midfield's gotten tighter this year?
That's what they say. I don't tend to pass judgment after a few days of testing and even after a couple of races. So we're just going to have to wait and see. What do you think?
This is where the rubber hits the road. And typically we see Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari step away from everybody else because they've got the money to keep developing, even while they're developing next year's car, and nobody else does. So is that going to be the case this year? I don't know. All that means is the top 6 cars, which this year looks like it's going to be a different 6 cars. This year, it looks like Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull are going to be the 3 at the top. I think Mercedes is going to get in. I mean, McLaren is this year. I think McLaren's going to get into the mix. I could be wrong. I think it'd be lovely if they did.
Yeah, absolutely, it would be. And what do you think of George Russell replacing Grosjean as the GPDA director?
I look at that and I think he's a young kid who probably isn't going to do much, and maybe he was put forth because nobody else really wanted to do it, and the GPDA doesn't have any teeth anymore.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it really to say, but I know he's got a reputation for being proactive, let's say. He could be good for this, and it kind of reminds me of actors learning to direct during their acting career because they know in the future they're going to be doing something else. And George Russell strikes me as that type of person. He's always looking for any kind of avenue that he can increase his knowledge of the sport and so forth. So it could turn out to be a good appointment, but we'll see.
Well, he's no Jackie Stewart.
Not yet. Not yet. And then we had Pierre Gasly commenting on his experience with Red Bull. And we both know that, the second Red Bull driver over the last few years has not done too well.
Not just the last couple of years, throughout the history of Red Bull.
Right. Yeah, I guess we can go back to Mark Webber and his famous not bad for number 2 driver back in 2010, I think it was. So, yeah, it's been going on for quite a while. Gasly talked about he felt he lacked support, he wasn't listened to, and he was quickly judged by his results. Do you think that will be any different for Checo?
No, I don't think it's going to be any different for Checo. I think if Perez has the ability to beat young Max, then yeah, he's going to become the number 1, and very quickly they're going to drop Max, and that really could happen. But the chance of that happening is slim to none because Max knows the car and Perez doesn't know the car. It's going to take him a few races to get up to speed, and if it takes him a few races to get up to speed, he is purely 100% delegated as a number 2.
Right. Yeah, I think people believe that because of his reputation that Red Bull won't treat him that way, but they're not going to change the way they operate. He will absolutely have to take that position from Max, or
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in my mind. And I say that because historically, the only team that's really been allowed to have a number 2 driver is Ferrari. And you think of Massa and you think of Barrichello, who in my mind were world champion quality drivers who were not allowed to do anything. And other teams have done the same, but they aren't allowed to say it for some reason. Only Ferrari is allowed to admit that that's what it is and play the team radio of saying, let them by,
Right, yeah. Yeah, and everyone, you should watch out for our upcoming feature on team orders because it's a very interesting and contentious topic.
Indeed.
So we'll definitely get into that. The final little bit of interesting news, I thought, was the F1 teams wanting more testing for 2022. What do you think about that, John?
I think that they've done the right thing with limiting testing. It hasn't helped. The idea was to reduce the expense of running a Formula One team because the underlings couldn't run massive tests.
Right.
And it basically moved the test to practice on race days. And now if you go to a race, there's a solid 3 hours of practice where everybody's out there hammering around the track, and it's wonderful for the spectators.
Right. Whereas in the past, they might have stayed in the pits to preserve engines and tires and so forth. This testing news leads us right into qualifying and the Haas team. If we talk about qualifying, the first thing that I noticed was the Haas team at the very back of the grid, and that's not a surprise, of course, but they did say that they're not going to develop this year's car. they're going to develop a next year's car this year. So I think that the Haas drivers are going to find themselves at the back of the grid throughout most of the year. Sometimes Williams might join them, and sometimes, obviously, drivers that are penalized will join them there. But it's also a good thing for Mick and Nikita because they get to develop without too much pressure.
And that's a wonderful thing. I don't hold great hope for either of those two drivers, but only time will tell. You know, if they need a real car underneath them, they need a car that can at least keep up to another team. And it looks like Williams is being removed from the chase cars.
Yeah, the very back, right? Particularly George Russell did well to get to Q2.
So the new rolling chicanes are the Haas. Fantastic.
And a particularly dangerous one, perhaps, in Mazepin, because he spun quite a lot this weekend.
I feel for him. I mean, nerves first race, and a hard charger in the feeder series. Watching him in the feeder series, he never gave up. He was very much an Alonso, always going for it. But we talked about this before, Rob, you and I, which is, in the feeder series, it's a completely different world where you're expected to go into a corner 4 deep with only one coming out, or maybe 2 coming out. And if you don't do that, you aren't going to get anywhere in the sport, because that's the only way that you're going to go to the front. And that starts in karting and it stops in Formula One. I think it's still probably there in NASCAR. I don't know. I don't watch NASCAR.
Right.
But yeah, the mentality has to change and wisdom has to come into play, which we've seen Max grow into, which is nice.
Yeah. That's the thing. Max versus Lewis is the thing that most people are interested in. And sure enough, that's what we got in qualifying. But that 4/10 gap is quite large because, as anyone who follows racing knows, that even a tenth or even half a tenth can make up quite a lot of time over a number of laps, right? You're over 5 seconds ahead if you're a tenth a lap faster in a 50-lap race.
It's those kind of gaps that make a difference. The 1/10 or the 2/10, you know what? It's not that much. I will argue that, in that, you make 1 or 2 mistakes in a lap, and there's your tenth, there's your 2/10. And it is slight mistakes like that. I mean, these guys are all driving within an inch every lap. They're so bloody consistent. They're so good. So all you have to do is make a slight mistake, and you're a tenth back. But 4/10 is a clear indication of a faster car.
Yep, at least in qualifying, right? And I remember years ago you saying you had attended a kart race and you were surprised by who was consistent and who wasn't in terms of their lines. And I believe it was Montoya had the same line every time, but some of the other racers were all over the place.
That was IndyCar. It was an IndyCar race, right? It was a kart race, and it was the Molson Indy in Toronto, and I couldn't even stay for it because even when I raced GT cars, I was more consistent than these guys were. It was like they're hunting to find a line, whereas there's a line. You should be able to find a line within 2 laps.
Right.
And these guys, no. The hard part's finding braking points, turn-in points, exit points. For getting on the throttle, getting off the throttle. Can you accelerate into the apex or not? And those guys are just all over the map with Indy cars. I don't know if it's still the same. I shouldn't be dissing IndyCar, but
no, that was quite a while ago because Montoya hasn't driven that series for a while as well.
I do know that Magnussen is killing it in the top level of sports cars right now, which thrills me. Yes.
What do you think of Mercedes and these other cars that are low rake? They're apparently not doing too well this year for downforce and so forth.
I think that's track specific, and there's the low rake cars, and there's the cars that look like a 1960s drag car because they've got so much air underneath their back end, and it's just 2 different approaches. The question for me is what happens when you get to Monaco? What happens when you get to the tighter circuits? And who's going to do better there? And I think one clearly does better on the tighter circuits, which is the lower rate cars,
right?
Because they're generating downforce in a different way. I don't think there's really that much difference between the two of them. It's just two different ways of doing it.
The other thing that really impressed me in qualifying was Yuki Tsunoda getting into second in Q1, and Alonso getting all the way to Q3, having been 2 years out of Formula One. That's extremely impressive.
He's still got it. He never stopped. I mean, the man raced everything. And I think it harkens back to Kimi Räikkönen, who, took time off and went and raced World Rally.
Yeah.
What kind of additional skills is that going to give you? You've already honed your skills in Formula One. And as Lewis said, you never stop learning. But my God, to step into a different venue like that and start racing other cars. And he did a lot. The one thing that he said in the pre-show was that it taught him that a lot more about teamwork, because that's one of the things that he was on the opposite end of when he was racing Formula One, and he destroyed a couple of teams.
You read Mark Priestley's book?
No, I haven't read Mark Priestley's book.
I haven't either, but I know large parts of it are about the Alonso Hamilton falling out, and Mark always says it was an unpleasant time to no one's surprise. So
I must read it.
And he had fractured his jaw just before the season started as well. Alonso always impressed me, but yeah, I've seen that other drivers that have gone to other series do say that the team element is at least more friendly than Formula One and more supportive. So it'd be interesting to see what lessons Alonso has taken from that. He's back with a team that he had his 2 championships were with Renault. I'm really excited to have him back. I don't expect too much in terms of podiums and so forth this season, but hopefully next season he's at the front.
I think we could see him on the podium.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. I mean, as you've said before, Rob, if you watch this guy driving the McLaren when it was a complete dog, he put it in places it just didn't belong. I mean, he had results that were way better than what anybody would ever expect with that car. So who knows? Who knows? We can cross our fingers.
Do you think he is one of the top drivers in Formula One historically?
Yeah, I can't go there. Right. I can't go there because I don't think there's anything but the best driver of his time.
Right.
I don't think you can compare Fangio to Jimmy Clark, to Jackie Stewart, to Francois Sever, to modern day Senna. I don't think that you can compare those guys, but I think he's definitely the top of his game. And think about it, if you were to start a team right now, my God, what a perfect guy to have in your team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that Hamilton was very impressive in his rookie season with Alonso as a teammate. So it's always exciting to see these very, very top drivers in Formula One, and hopefully Alonso gets himself into a top drive, and hopefully it is with Alpine and they improve.
I don't think he will. I think his only hope is Alpine. I don't think that he has any hope at all of any of the major teams giving him another chance. I think he's like Kimi Räikkönen. I seriously think that Kimi Räikkönen still has a world championship in him if he was to get the proper ride. I mean, the man is an absolutely wonderful driver, and I think he's got the will to do it. But nobody's going to give him the chance. He's too old, and I think that Alonso has burned too many bridges to get a proper ride again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so as well. It was unfortunate to have Sergio. He had to take a risk, and he tried to qualify on mediums and didn't make it to Q3. So that put him back in the grid. And Yuki Tsunoda, 14th, not bad for his first qualifying. And then we had Sebastian. What happened to him in qualifying?
And Sebastian just getting completely scuppered by flags.
Right. And that was the Mazepin, was it?
And you know what? I think he's got the same problem as some other drivers, which is he really lets those sort of things affect him. And I think that when that happens close to a race, he can almost guarantee that he's not going to do well in the race.
Right. Yeah. He sort of has these little outbursts, right? Whenever an incident happens, and it's often not exactly what happened as well.
I think some of that's political too, though.
Right. Yeah. All right, well, that's qualifying, so let's discuss the race.
A boring race. Sorry. You know what? I shouldn't say that. I liked it because I had the opportunity for all the new drivers and seeing all the new drivers and all the new driver lineup and what was going to transpire. And I liked that a lot. The starts were multiple starts thanks to the safety cars.
Yeah, 2 safety periods within the first 5 laps, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, and then we had Alonso out with brake issues. We'll go over the negative things first, I guess. Had Alonso go out, we had Perez dying on the formation lap, and then we had Mazepin spinning and right at the beginning. And then we had Bottas. He had a very bad pit stop, so bad luck Bottas continues. That's about it for... And then I guess the coverage of the Perez going through the field was pretty weak as well.
But it was great seeing him do it, boy.
Mm-hmm. It's just that we had to look at it, this small window in the stack of the order stack. They should have shown more of it.
Yes. For me, he was the driver of the day. To see what he was able to do with that car, which is, I will guarantee you, an inferior car to Max's. See him go up the ladder like that. That was really impressive.
But expected, I think, too, right? Given that he does have a better car than he had last year.
Yes.
What else interested you about the race?
The finish was the highlight for me, and just the immaturity of Max and his engineer. Max could have let Lewis by on a straight, so he didn't sacrifice so much time and probably still would have won the race. It was his race. He should have won that race, in my mind.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't like the footage. I didn't like the screaming. Sky TV screaming. That I find very annoying. I just tend to hit the mute button at the start so I don't have to listen to the wailing.
Do you think Crofty is trying to replicate Murray or something?
Yeah, I think he's always been that way. He's always been a little bit wound up. The sad part for me is it sort of found its way down to the other commentators. And luckily Martin isn't that good at it.
It was great to see Alonso back, but didn't have a particularly good race. He had some good dices, but fell back. And then he had that brake issue and he had to stop. So that was unfortunate.
I think he did spectacularly. Compare him to his teammate. I think that he did what he's always done, which is wrung more out of the car than is actually there. He's got everything. I think that he's got some, if they can put a half decent car underneath him, I think that he's going to do quite well this year.
Yes, but I don't think they will be putting too much of a decent car behind him. I really think if you look at the end of the race, the top 3, even with Bottas pitting to get the 1 point for the fast lap, he can do that because he's so far ahead of 4th place. There's still a really, really, really large gap between the top teams and the mid-tier teams. And Alonso, for all he's such a great driver, he just hasn't been able to get into a top team again. Again, hopefully next season with Alpine moving forward or attempting to move forward and with the new rules, they find their way. It would be very good to see Alonso at the front again.
I think F1's lost a lot of fans because of that. Personally, I look at it and, the last few years I haven't really cared about Lewis or Val and Max. Well, a little bit about Max because, obviously that's Adrian Newey at work, giving him a car that can run up front with an engine that other people have that they can't get anywhere near the front. So there's a genius of Adrian Newey at work. But it's been the dicing below, and I think we're tighter this year than ever with best of the rest. You've got the top 2 teams, and Ferrari's improved, but they're still in the bottom group. And so now we've got a race of 18 cars, and top 4 cars have the ability to get the points, and maybe McLaren can step it up and join that group. I hope, but I don't know.
I was really impressed with McLaren, particularly Lando Norris. The thing with Formula One is at times the start is so key to the end result, and he made sure that he got up as far as possible at the start, and he took 4th place, which was the maximum he could have done in that car, I think, given the speed of the other cars in front of him. That was very impressive. Ricardo, we'll see how he does. He's a great driver, but didn't seem to do too well today, but, that may take some time. And I was really impressed. I'm sorry?
It's Danny's first race, and pretty much everybody says it takes 3 or 4 races to get used to a car and tune it to your driving style. And how do you set it up for your driving style? And maybe it'll take that. I think you'll see him ahead of Lando pretty darn quickly.
In terms of the actual racing, I really liked Stroll and Alonso. That battle was pretty interesting. The Alonso, Vettel, and Sainz dice was pretty cool. Sonata and Alonso. That pass that Yuki did on Alonso on the straight, it did show that the DRS is very, very powerful at this circuit. The passes on the straight were pretty easy.
If you want to talk about the dicing, yeah, there was all kinds of great dicing. I was a little bit disappointed that it was in a window and they didn't have it on the main presentation screen. That sky direction that is the problem. But yeah, there's some wonderful ones. And it was nice seeing Stroll not necessarily getting his elbows out, but he's racing beyond his years. He's racing like an F1 driver that's been there for 10 years. He knows how to make his car wide, and he knows when he can dive in cleanly. And if I was racing, I'd be perfectly happy to go wheel to wheel with him because he looks like a very, very mature driver.
Yeah, similar to Kimi Räikkönen, right? You can always race Kimi without fear of him taking you out or something like that. He's a very fair racer. And Bottas had that 10.9 second pit stop. Luck doesn't go his way, does it?
Not only does the luck not go his way, but on top of that, it really affects him. He's sort of like an early day Lewis, where he tends to get emotionally disturbed and sort of gives up a little bit, I think, early. Maybe that's just me, but that's the sort of impression I get. He needs a better coach.
Well, the thing with successful drivers, like as we all know, every one of these drivers is very fast and very good, but they have to be consistently fast. They have to deliver that speed and that performance over and over and over again. And Lewis does that, Max does that, and Valtteri just isn't doing that.
It took a while for Max to get there, but he's finally doing it. But he did show some immaturity in, the final laps of the race. And, I think that Martin or somebody covered it in the TV coverage and saying he didn't have to let Lewis by where he let Lewis by. He could have waited to the main straight where the gap wouldn't have been so great. And is that Max's fault? I think maybe it's a little bit more the engineer's fault. But hey, who knows? He should have won the race.
Yes. There seems to be a problem in Formula One and perhaps in other sports too, with certain rules are sort of confusing, right? So that part of the circuit where they were going off repeatedly, we heard radio messages saying, Mercedes is doing it, so go ahead, Max, you can do it now too. And then later on, Lewis got a warning, and so they couldn't do it anymore. And then he did go off circuit during that pass. So to me, that's what has to happen. He had to give the position back, but I'm very fuzzy on where and when. I thought it was like within 2 corners or something. So could he have waited to the straight?
My issue with that is I look a little bit deeper on that and think that when they told Lewis Hamilton that he could do what he wanted to do on the corner and use a little bit more of off-piste, I don't think that was to tell him to do that. I think they already knew that that was one of the reasons why Max was so much faster, and they were just alerting the officials that that's what Max was doing. So it stopped Max doing it, and that could have been the final death knell for Max in not winning the race and not being able to catch Lewis. But good on Lewis. I mean, to be driving with old tires like that and to stay in front, wow.
Yeah, to me, that's always another sign of top drivers is they can manage their tires very well, even when they're worn down. I was pretty skeptical that Max would even catch him. So I was a little surprised that he eventually did catch him. And as I remember Martin saying, he thought it was a bit slower than he thought it would be. But once he lost that momentum and let him by, that just seemed to be the end of it.
I thought he was going to blow right by him. I really did. I thought that he was going to catch. I thought Max was going to catch Lewis in short order and just make him another rolling chicane.
I'm just used to seeing that sort of 10 laps left, 4-second gap between first and second driver making progress, and then they seem to run into that dirty air area and tires start to get affected and so forth. So I thought that that's what would happen to Max, but he did get right up to him. But as we all saw, unfortunately, it didn't work out.
I don't know if I have a driver of the race. Yeah, I do. I have a driver of the race. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, it's definitely Lando Norris still. I know he didn't finish on the podium, but I think he did everything he could. He got the maximum that he could out of that car to finish fourth. So it's definitely Lando.
And he's young, right? I mean, so it's impressive for him to hold it together like that.
Yes, and I noticed that he has a Logitech sponsorship on his steering wheel, so we see more of that marriage of the sim world with the real racing world.
Because he was very involved in that, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
For me, it's definitely Perez. And you know what? I've never really liked Perez. But to watch him come from the back, I really wish there was more coverage, because he clearly drove the wheels off of that car. And if you've ever been to a race car live and you've been there and you've seen somebody drive from the back, it is truly wonderful to watch. It is so thrilling. So he's definitely my driver of the day.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate that they kept that footage in the lower corner of the screen. How would you rate the race?
I think just due to the finish, I'd probably put it up there at about a 7 or an 8. And also, it gets an unfair advantage in that it's the first race of the year with all new drivers. Well, not all new drivers, but new driver lineups, which made things more interesting to see how things were going to wash out. And I'm always looking at what teammates are doing in comparison to each other, like always. So that kept me busy through the whole race. But at the same time, I'd rate the coverage as 1.5.
Right.
No, I'll make it a 2.5 because of the Murray Walker piece, and it actually brought a tear to my eye. I will admit.
Yeah, I'd say I'd give this a 6 or 7. I enjoyed a fair amount of dicing, but still not too pleased with to me, they're just such massive gaps between the top teams and the lower teams. I really, really hope that next season that gap reduces with the new rules. But given the history of Formula One, I'm a little bit skeptical, but we'll see.
It won't. It never has been that way. There's always been a car off the front. And it's at least we have a couple of teams that are off the front. Whereas if you think back to the Michael Schumacher days, Michael Schumacher and Ferrari changed the world. And they changed the whole thing. Before that, they always just covered the top cars and the dicing of the top cars on television coverage. That's all they covered. And they learned very quickly, probably after about 3 years, that they had to cover the dicing behind them, and every now and again they cut to Michael out front. And so, I think I've just gotten used to that. And now I'm interested in the personalities. I'm interested in these young guys and how they hold out. What have we got next? We've got Italy next.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a good race. What else is there, Rob? Are we done?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Thank you for joining us. And don't forget, as always, please subscribe, share, and like. And we appreciate your comments and feedback.
Thanks, everyone. We look forward to hearing from you.